So today we have Vaughn here. He is our head of AI enablement, director of QA, alongside many other titles. But
Wearer of many hats.
yeah,
Wear many hats. Hey guys, great to be here. I'm really excited. It's my second time here on the podcast, so it's really great to talk about this topic with you.
Yeah, we're excited to have you back. All right. So for today, we wanted to focus in a little bit on accountability within AI and how that is becoming quite a prevalent question in today's workflows. So, do you think you could walk us through a moment where AI took a project somewhere that you didn't want it to go? You couldn't easily pull it back in the right direction?
Yeah, of course. So since I became head of AI enablement like a few months ago, I've been exposed to several projects, both client projects and also internal projects that started using AI in order to either produce faster output or simplify the complexity of a project or even create architectural recommendations off of it. And most of the situations didn't really go off the rails. Everything went fine because they were pretty targeted at short and specific contexts, which of course prevented the AI in going in a direction that it was not supposed to. However, I did see the other side of the problem when something changed along the way during the chat sessions where the engineer was trying to actually enhance one of their skills or one of their prototypes. And because of overbloating the context and not really understanding what the AI was doing, it went in a completely different direction. And it was at one point too hard to revert everything. So they actually started over, which of course meant a lot of tokens being lost, a lot of time being lost, and not a feasible result being produced. I'm not saying it wasn't something that was a learning exercise because at least they knew what to do the second time. But the idea is that if you do not stick to small contexts and conversations and do it in small increments, the risk of failing becomes extremely high if you just keep going into the same, let's say, chat window, or if you do not commit and save your changes so that you can effectively roll back in case something goes wrong. And another thing that is really important is the review process. I mean, because we're talking about accountability, is who reviews your work. Oftentimes, the need to be ahead of the curve and take initiative and try to generate something that is beneficial for the entire team is often an exercise that gets taken up by one single engineer, right? And they want to do good, but the idea is that because of this rush, they often forget to ask people to review or to actually test the solution that they're working on thoroughly. Or they do test it right at the beginning, but as time goes by, they become more confident in their collaboration with the AI and they do start to not spend so much time on testing, but rather they focus on the area of improving, or they try to chase nice and shiny features and add as much as possible inside the solution they are building. And without a reviewer, because practically who reviews our work, it can go off the rails pretty quickly and pretty fast. So they might end up going in that wrong direction without even realizing it. And by the time they do, it's kind of too late. So it takes a lot of effort to actually fix the solution or revert or do something that will bring it back to the initial course that was set.
Nice. All right. If something goes wrong with AI generated code, I know we just sort of talked about this a little bit, or AI built tests, who do you think owns it? Should it be the person who built the tool, the person who's reviewing the tool? Is it the tool itself? What do you think?
I think it's a joint effort between the person who is building and reviewing. I mean, to get one thing straight, it's important to have a builder and it's important to have a reviewer. It's just like in Star Wars, right? Where the Sith, there is always a master and also the one who is the learner. So there should always be in pairs. So somebody builds, but somebody else needs to review. Of course, the person who is building the tool using LLM assistance should, of course, first review their work and make sure that everything is fine. You can have a team of agents if you want to that are discussing and trying to debate in order to tell you if you did build the right thing or you did not. They can criticize each other. There's several skills actually right now. Grill me and grill me with docs. These are just a few from that guy called Matt Pocock. And there's also the ability to, for example, if you're using GitHub Copilot, you can switch between LLMs, right? So you can create something in Opus, and then you can ask GPT to review it and vice versa in order to try at least to see if one of the LLMs did not miss something and if you yourself did not miss something. But then it's important to also have the reviewer come along and be critical and be realistic of what was built there, and also try to think with a clear and simplistic mind whether or not what you did build is not too complex, unneeded to be so complex, right? And try to see if like the same principles, from programming or from testing were still applied. So then to answer the question, it falls on both, I believe. There should be a pair, there should be a builder, there should be a reviewer, and I believe both of these are accountable. The LLM or the tooling itself has limited accountability. I'm sure that if we look through the terms and conditions of every provider, we'll see that, okay, this is an LLM, it can make mistakes. You even get this notification at times when you're using various agents, and definitely it should not really be the user. I mean, the user is trying to use the solution that you built, but they do so in good faith that you built the right things. When we're going back to accountability, I do believe that the creator and reviewer are the ones who should be accountable. And this thing is not new, actually, because it was like this even before we started using coding agents and all of this jazz that's up to these days. Because a developer would raise a pull request, somebody else would review it, they would give their okay, a tester would come in and verify that the code that they implemented was working accordingly, they would also give the okay, and then you would have also user acceptance testing maybe at the end done by a client who again would review and say yes, everything is fine before they would actually release it to the wider public. So the concept is still there. It just has changed a bit, and the fact that it perceives to have been changed is just because of the speed that we're coding and the independence that we get nowadays. Because actually, if you have your agent, you can do everything from A to Z, right? So you can do the planning, you can do the coding, you can do the testing, you can do everything, but it's just one person doing it, which is not really that safe, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. I have always liked to have someone else check over my work because they're looking at it with fresh eyes, right? Like it's the same thing with spelling mistakes where you're like, yeah, I know this is all good. And then someone else looks at it and they're like, you spelled 6 things wrong. That sort of idea, I think.
Yeah, happens. Well, I actually did encounter this. So I was building something with an agent, right? I built a prototype for a testing framework quite recently, and I explicitly told it to make sure that there's no stale code, there's no stale references in the documentation, make sure to update every piece of documentation. And in the end, when I asked another LLM to review, it said, okay, well, I found some stale code here. I found this reference which doesn't really make sense. I found this section which contradicts this other section. So it can happen. It's more frequent than we actually care to admit or care to check out. So definitely need to review what we've been doing either via an LLM if we're just alone in the team, but if you do have teammates, just ask them again to help you out and review. So completely agree with you. You might
Yeah.
find more than spelling mistakes.
So, like, speaking on the QA side of things, though, like when it comes to testing, because you mentioned that that's one layer of the I guess testing pipeline to make sure everything that makes it to the client's okay. Do we tell QA that the code they're testing was AI generated? If we tell them, does that in theory change how they approach it, or should we just pretend that it's all like written by a human and see what they catch?
This is like a very ethical question, right? So if it's according to my ethics and my values, I would say that AI agent assistance was used in the development of this code, but I would leave the critical parts, at least of it, to still be under a human's control, or would explicitly say that for testing, right? When you do validations, de-validations, I would not leave them to be LLM driven, right? So they need to be deterministic. They need to be plain old code, which is tried and tested and works. So the agent might execute that code, but it's always the same piece of code, which always gives a yes or no answer, right? So you can tell them that, okay, we used, for example, LLM in order to run or drive the test, which could be based on goals or steps, but the validations themselves are still human written. And that part is not affected by the agent or the LLM, right? So you can even have a rule that will say, okay, never change this part, so that you at least have the certainty that the code and the test itself is doing what it should. So that would minimize the impact towards an end user, whoever that may be, a consumer, when you tell them that yes, LLM assistance was involved, but it was just to make the work more efficient, whereas the critical areas and validations were still human decided and human driven.
Mhm.
All right. Okay, we've got a question from a listener for you. Um, so they wrote, someone on our team approved code that was AI generated and AI tested, and it broke in production. They're sitting in the postmortem right now. What would you tell them?
Good luck. No, I'm just joking. So, in these kinds of situations, we have to admit that we're all humans and humans made mistakes. The question would be, what caused the situation for AI generated code and AI generated testing to actually reach production before being confidently validated? If there was no human in the loop, that means that there is a process problem. There's too much reliance on the LLM, and they need to actually introduce some kind of review human in the loop process before the pull request gets approved or after the test report runs, in order to see what happens. And again, what they could do is actually try to analyze what went wrong and how they can do that differently in the future. So if a process where you have LLM or you have AI generated code going into production and being tested independently by an AI, you kind of assume that there will be some risks when code actually gets deployed and used, right? So you should do risk-based testing, at least make sure that the application will work, at least make sure that the validations are correct for your specific scenario. So I guess the general conclusion would be you still need to keep the human in the loop, especially on the QA side. And I don't think, if we are still on this topic, I don't think that QA as a job will go away. I think it will become even more important because somebody will need to actually check what was produced and what was tested, even if by an AI, before it gets to production.
Mm-hmm.
Because in this day and age, you can't really afford a lot of mistakes for customers. There's so many products right now that it's easy to switch over to something else.
Mm-hmm.
So I believe that checking and introducing a human to do the checks is going to be critical. So my answer for them would be, take a look at your process, see if it was completely independent, because again, this means that some risks were assumed and you relied on the actual release of code, which might not have been checked by a human. And if that is the case, try to introduce human validation when PRs get approved. When tests get written, you can review the AI generated test code as well. make sure again that the acceptance criteria and the definition of done is respected, right? Validate that it's supposed to be testing what it is actually supposed to be testing, and also do another sweep at the end just to be safe. I mean,
Yeah.
you're already saving time by having AI generate tests and code. I mean, you can just sit back and relax. This is not the kind of job where you do that. I mean, as a QA, you should also always be a bit on your toes when it comes to trusting a machine that produces some code and then it puts it into production.
Yeah. Kind of as a follow-up question to that then, what kind of skills do you think QA engineers will need going forward? I think it's going to be possibly shifting.
Yeah. Well, in terms of hard skills, I'm not entirely sure because those can change. I mean, for the AI area, you read something today and in 1 week's time may not be relevant. You may use a tooling now and in 6 months' time, it might be bought by another company, sold. It could be shut down and deprecated because it might not be the right one anymore for your specific use case, or they just want to eliminate the competition. So, in terms of hard skills, it's extremely hard to say. I still think that old coding knowledge, old fashioned coding knowledge, where you actually understand what is going on, you can write a piece of code, you can review a piece of code, will still be critical. But I think that a lot of shifting right now will be on the making sure that the what you might call them, the requirements and acceptance criteria are clearly defined. The
Mhm.
limits are extremely well defined, and what is supposed to happen and what is not supposed to happen. Understanding guardrails, again, and how to impose them is another thing that will be important. And also being present in case that the AI starts going on different paths that may not be in accordance to your requirements. So there'll be a lot of edge case testing, most likely, also on functional and non-functional requirements. I do not believe that AI at the moment really takes into account a lot of the non-functional requirements.
Mm.
There can be a lot of security risks in the code that it produces and in the way that it approaches things. Even when you're prompting, you can tell it to, I don't know, skip like all the um, running of commands, right? So you can tell it just run all of the commands in these sessions, or give it dangerous permissions, which again could be a risk. I don't think it's taking account things related to performance. So the hard skills that we knew until now, like security testing, performance testing, writing code, and reading code and understanding what is there, are still going to be important for a human. But alongside of this, it's also going to be the soft skills of understanding better the requirements, the limitations, the edge cases, what the intent of the AI producing the code is, and what it's trying to achieve, and if it did achieve it. Things related more towards validation and verification than just plain old acceptance criteria that were written in the tickets and were easy to follow along. So the scope is getting much bigger than that. Because right now, if you're just telling the AI, okay, you need to respect these 3 acceptance criteria, yeah, it can write code based on them, but it doesn't mean it will be the most optimized or the safest code, right? So you still need to understand a bit if it did the right thing, and if there's also, like I said, non-functional requirements that still need to be taken into account.
Hmm.
So how would you then, I guess, kind of encourage your team to adopt these AI tools, especially with that sort of uneasiness of, like, is it really going to be all that helpful? The accountability risks behind it. How would you then convince your team that, hey, it's still worth using?
Hmm. Yeah. So On the QA team, this is one of the things that I'm actually struggling with most, which is AI adoption. A lot of people are still old fashioned, let's call them. They still rely on writing code by hand. They still rely on generating their test data by hand, which of course is very time consuming, right? So I would tell them start small with some small task for testing that is either very much repeatable and predictable, or you need to, I don't know, quickly generate a lot of um, Excel files for a specific type of testing, right? Or a lot of Word files, right? Or if you're out of ideas on how to test a specific field, start small. Just ask the AI, okay, can you generate this type of file based off of this pattern or this sample file, right? If I have a sample file with one entry, make it 1,000 entries that are similar because this is what I need to test instead of you writing it manually, right? Or tell it to give you ideas for edge cases when you're trying to test, I don't know, a password field or a way to log in. How can a user log in? So you understand all the sides of the problem. So the only limit is your imagination. But again, if you do try to think about scenarios which are either repeatable or small enough, you can feed them to the AI and see what it responds with and see if those are feasible. So start small task for it, and then see if it helps you. If it helps you shave off some time in your workday, even if it's half an hour or 1 hour, then that is already successful. I'm not telling you to delegate everything to the AI and you just sit back and you just review it and that's it, because that will atrophy your skills. But do give it like the small repetitive tasks. It was just like with manual testing and automation, right? You
Mhm.
would do automation for the tasks that were repeatable, predictable. So then they would run as part of a regression package, let's say, and you could focus on the exploratory testing, the edge cases, and other functional tests which might be harder to automate. So it's the same principle here. Give it the small tasks and then you focus on others.
Nice. Have you noticed a difference in things that you're testing based off of, like, I guess, can you tell the difference between code that has been written with the help of an LLM versus code that's been written by just a human?
Well, based on my experience, because I've been looking at code for over 10 years now, for me, it's easy to see it because usually people have their own style of writing code and building their testing frameworks. And LLMs cannot really replicate this. They do follow good case practices, of course, but you can see that the way that the variables are named, the way that comments are added, the spacing, even the new lines that are added, you can tell that they were generated by an LLM and not necessarily by a human, right? And plus, they don't really understand like the entire context of the framework. So if you write a test, most likely it will just blurt out the test script. You have to specifically tell it, oh, I use the page object model, I use a locator library, for example, or I have sensitive variables which are stored in environment files. And the problem being that the LLM will spit out, most likely without any additional instructions, only the one test script, right? And if you just copy paste and put it there, you can easily tell. I mean, at least for Playwright, for me, it's easy to tell if some code was written using Playwright's code gen feature
Mhm.
versus what was written manually. Because people usually tend to encapsulate a lot, whereas these AI generated code is trying to be as kind of as simplistic and straightforward as possible.
Mhm. Does that difference change how you test or how specific you are in your testing?
Mm, I don't really understand the question.
Mm.
Can you be a bit more specific?
Yeah, sorry. So when you're looking at a piece of code to be tested and you can tell it's been written by an LLM or has been helped by an LLM, do you change how you test to like really ensure that you're catching everything? Are you more thorough than with like a human's code? Are you less thorough? Do
Oh,
you do
yes.
different things?
Yes, I do that. So at one point, I started when I started working a bit more frequent with Cloud Code and with actually no VS Code and Copilot, right? So when I started doing this, I tried to see how feasible it were for the agent to analyze some Jira tickets, some requirements which had thorough acceptance criteria, and let it test for me versus what I would do as testing. So it followed those acceptance criteria to the letter, and that was about it. Whereas as a human, I would not really stick only to the acceptance criteria because I have the context of the entire application. So I know that if you make a change in a specific module, something else may break somewhere else, right? If that's the case where you have code that was generated by an LLM, you should definitely test it and review it maybe 3 or 4 times better than you would do with somebody else's code because you have the context and the understanding of the application that you're supposed to be testing, right? So
Mhm.
I do have a tendency, even then, I did have a tendency to verify the acceptance criteria by hand even though it said, yeah, everything is fine, just to make sure that it did catch and cover everything, plus the acceptance criteria and non functional requirements that I knew should also have been met, right? So it's the same for the test, for an automated test, or for a piece of code that was written. You still have to look at the bigger picture and look beyond the acceptance criteria in order to know that it did not miss something.
So we're like not really in the world of the Jetsons yet with our robots doing everything for us.
No, but I ask you a question back. Should we be in the world of the Jetsons where everything gets done by robots instead of humans, or at least there's a human in the loop that verifies everything? I mean, I strongly feel that this leads to mental and skill atrophy. So
Mhm.
at one point, there'll be a handful of experts left who actually know how to build stuff and understand what is there, whereas the others will just do vibe coding and rely too much on the LLM. So we're looking potentially at a dystopian future, just like Wally,
Mhm.
where all the humans were on that ship and they were just sitting in those beds and nobody did anything because everything was automated. Well, that's very risky because you still need to understand what is beyond the product that an LLM gives you, right? So you need to understand what's under the hood, what and how things actually work in order to know what can go wrong and how they actually can scale. Because oftentimes the problem with these LLM generated code and the prototypes that it does and the products that it does is that they don't really scale, right? Because the context is so small and it understands only its small world, but it fails to grasp the bigger picture.
Mhm. It's actually really interesting too, like when you read code generated by an LLM or an AI, whatever you want to call it. It's almost it lacks that like an easy way that I've noticed to spot is it lacks that little bit of human laziness, so to speak.
Hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
like the AI doesn't get tired, it doesn't get mentally burnt out from writing
Hmm.
documentation, so it'll write like blocks and blocks, the hundreds of lines of just documentation, whereas a human will try to like cut that as short as possible. They
Yeah.
will, the variable names you mentioned earlier, like instead of, you know, massive, long, lengthy ones that exactly describe what the variable was, it's usually just a couple words. So
Exactly.
it is
Exactly.
once you kind of know what to look for, it gets kind of easy to spot. But yeah, it's I do agree with you though. It shouldn't be we shouldn't necessarily be living in the world of the Jetsons. As fun as that sounds in a cartoon, it's we'd get bored.
Yeah.
I don't know, man. There's some benefits to that. My robot vacuum is my favorite thing.
But you still have to vacuum under your couch or between the cushions.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
of course, but like it takes that like it vacuums most of my house every day.
Yes.
So the constant crumbs are under control, at least
Yeah.
in most areas.
Yeah, which is
That's
a
what I need.
repeatable task.
Exactly.
Like I said before, it's a repeatable task that is, it's controlled. So the couch is always where it is, the table is always where it is. So,
Well,
of course, it will always cover the same ground. And even then, I know from my own robot vacuum cleaner, it can have issues with not going to specific areas, or if
mhm,
it's like there's, like stepping a small step between your kitchen and your living room. Sometimes it can pass over that, and sometimes it cannot pass over that,
yep,
even though it did so 50 times before. Maybe once or twice it won't be able to do that. And I know this from experience because it's the same situation for me with my robot vacuum cleaner. So it's the same with an AI, right? You
yep,
tell it to do something, maybe it will get it right the first 50 times, but the first and 52nd it won't. So that's why humans still need to be accountable for what it's supposed to do and the output that it releases. You still
mhm,
have to check it because I mean it's already doing the heavy lifting for you. Come on, man, just you know get a grip, a grip, and just look at the results and review them. It's not that hard. I mean, it already did what you did in 2 days. So 10 minutes of reviewing shouldn't be that hard.
yeah,
But this is also because we usually like Valentin said, we like to take the short way out or the shortcuts. We tend to be a bit lazy. So when we will get to one point where even knowledge that gets distilled and is just one paragraph will be like, this is too much for me to read. Whereas before we would read like 5 or 6 articles and we were okay with that, even if it
mhm,
took like 2 hours. But it will get to a point where you send me something which is one page of distilled knowledge, and I'll be like, I don't want to read that. It's too much. Well, partially yes, because it when AI boils it down, it tends to lose a lot of the context and it doesn't focus on the important bits. It just
mhm,
tries to do a summary, which oftentimes feel like, it's chopped up and put together, like a serial killer's letter with letters. So you don't know who did it. It's
yeah,
exactly the same, right? Whereas if it had a bit more fluency, then I would look at it a bit different.
mhm,
And this of course is a huge turnoff for me many times, because when I see a document coming in which I know 100% it was AI generated using AI, and it has that header and the description and the small tables and everything, I do get discouraged from reading it, to be
mhm,
honest, because I know that the person who did it did not invest part of their soul and their ideas and their ability to work in it. They just asked AI, okay, do this for me, these are the ideas, and that's it.
yeah,
Well, you could have written to me directly on a Slack message or an email, okay, hey man, this is the ideas, this is it, and that's it. I don't need a PDF telling me the same thing which is 5 pages long.
mhm,
It's almost like it does the thing back in high school English class, which was trying to reach a word, like, cutoff point, you know? Your teacher would say, like, "This essay has to be 100 or 1,000 words long."
Hmm.
So the AI just kinda starts to it's a little verbose sometimes, and
yeah,
you try to tell it to keep things short, but then it loses the context. It's really interesting. It's fascinating how it thinks, 'cause we wanna think that AI thinks like a person, but it doesn't really. It
Yeah.
it it thinks like what you would expect, I wanna say, like an alien to think a person thinks like. It's
Yeah,
honestly like an
impersonating a
alien
person.
pretending to be a person, right?
Yeah.
And then it's like and every time it hallucinates something and you're like, "No, that's wrong," it's always like, "Oh, you're right. You're so
yeah.
right. Like,
Oh,
Yeah.
you're right
Yeah,
to
yeah,
push back on
exactly.
that."
When you catch it, it says, yeah, oh, yes, I did a mistake. Or, yeah, that's right, I missed this. No biggie.
Yeah.
yeah,
But it will get annoying, and what it does, it kind of decreases your confidence in what it outputs. And you're completely right when you say that the thinking process of the AI is fascinating. Yeah, even if you look at so if you have Copilot, right, and you open like the thinking messages while it's working, it's really interesting to see how it thinks and how it correlates between what you asked it as a user, where it says, okay, the user asked me this, I should think about this first, and then this, and this, and this, and this. But it's still going on predictions, right? So if the prediction, the predicted next step would be going off the rails, then of course it will hallucinate confidently, just like you say. So there's no control in that. That's the one thing that I do not like about AIs and LLMs, even especially in testing. There's no real control over the process. There is a way to have control over the final validation, but the way in which it gets to that final validation can vary, right? So I told you just a few moments ago that I tried to build a testing framework, which was AI assisted, and I was successful to some extent. But the solution to validate something on a page, let's say, had to be pure old Python code, which was written and was, okay, you need for assertions, you need to run this piece of code. I don't want the LLM interpreting anything, right? And in order to make sure that it's getting to that piece of code that needs to be validated using the Python code, I had to actually implement a way of it working with either specific steps or goals. If I give it a test case that is written in the manner of a goal, it will take whichever path it thinks is the best, and at the end, it will run the validation. But if I tell it go by steps, it will go from homepage to login to this specific button to this specific section and then do the validation, right? Because goal could be just, okay, I reached the homepage. Let me just open directly the URL to the specific page where I need to do the validation, which is okay, a valid scenario. Yes, there is a valid scenario. You can do deep linking versus you can do navigation. But for the purpose of my test and for coverage, I need to very, very, very carefully decide which path it will take. So this lack of determinism and the ability to not perform the same action every time is what actually I do not like when you're doing LLM assistance in the terms of, here is what you need to test, do it based off of this scenario, versus when you generate, let's say, a playwright file, which the steps never change. Once it did it and the steps are there, it can only execute those steps in that specific order. There's no room for interpretation. But if you just use LLM assistance like, hey, Claude, I have this page to test, make sure that these things are okay. It can do it once in a specific manner, the second time in a different manner. So you lose the predictability, you lose the determinism, which in the world of QA is not a good thing to have, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's fine if it wants to explore different paths, if you instruct it to do that, but you still need to make sure that specific paths are still working.
Do you have any other advice for any QAs with using AI? Any warnings?
Advice, like I said, imagination is your only limit. Try to use AI in order to make your job faster and more effective, but always take it with a pinch of salt. Always try to validate what it did. Never rely on it too much. And for the critical things and critical aspects, make sure that you use good old straight validations, which actually tell you in black and white if the thing is happening or not, right? And that's it. I burnt all my tokens right now. So we're at the end of this chat session.